Evan had always been a romantic. He believed in love at first sight, in grand gestures, and in the idea that soulmates were real. When he met Charlotte, everything about her made sense. She was everything he had dreamed of, intelligent, kind, and fiercely independent. They clicked almost instantly. They talked for hours on end, making plans, laughing about trivial things, and sharing intimate moments that felt like magic. It didn't take long for Evan to fall in love with her, deeply, irrevocably, completely. Their relationship moved fast, but it felt right. After 2 years together, Evan proposed, and Charlotte said yes with a smile that made his heart soar. They began planning their wedding, imagining their life together, and making promises that felt sacred. Evan saw their future clearly, and everything seemed perfect. But beneath the surface, something was slowly shifting. Charlotte, always so confident and charming, began to change. It wasn't dramatic at first, just small things, a comment here, a slight shift in her mood there. But over time, the cracks became more obvious. She became distant, distracted, and often seemed impatient with him. The worst part was the growing tension between them. There were no big fights, just an undercurrent of frustration that neither of them wanted to address. It wasn't until the week before the wedding that Evan began to wonder if they were still on the same page. He had been working late, as usual. He was the director of a successful marketing firm and had a demanding schedule, but he never let it interfere with his relationship with Charlotte. At least, he didn't think he did. That evening, he had returned home to find her in a conversation on the phone, her back turned to him, her voice soft but filled with an edge he hadn't heard in it before. The words were muffled, but Evan could catch snippets. "I can't keep doing this. It's too much. I need a way out." Evan stopped in his tracks, his stomach sinking. Charlotte had always been the strong one, the one who knew what she wanted. But this? This wasn't her. His heart raced as he tried to ignore the feeling of dread rising in him, but he couldn't. Something was terribly wrong. The woman he was about to marry, the woman he had built a life with, was slipping away. He waited a few moments, unsure what to do. The voice on the other end of the phone was muffled, but he could hear the words, "He doesn't know," and "I can't keep pretending." It felt like a punch to the gut. He had to know. Evan stepped closer to her, his heart pounding in his chest. When she turned around, the look on her face was one of shock, quickly replaced by something else, something he couldn't quite place. A coldness? Or was it guilt? "Evan, you're home early," Charlotte said, her voice unnaturally bright. "I heard you on the phone," he replied, his voice tight. He had no idea what to expect, but the weight of the moment pressed heavily on him. Charlotte's face blanched. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. She seemed to be searching for the right words, but nothing came. Evan's voice broke the silence. "Who were you talking to? What did you mean when you said you needed a way out?" Her expression faltered, the facade she had been trying to maintain slipping. "Evan, it's nothing. Just stress. The wedding, the planning, everything. It's been a lot, you know." "No, Charlotte. It's more than that." His voice hardened as he took a step forward. "You're not telling me something. I need to know what's going on. If we're going to spend the rest of our lives together, there can't be secrets between us." She shook her head, avoiding his gaze. "It's nothing. Really. I love you, Evan. I swear I do." But the doubt was planted, and it grew inside him, its roots digging deep. Evan tried to push the conversation aside, telling himself that it was just wedding stress. Charlotte had always been the planner, the one who kept things organized. Perhaps, with everything happening so fast, she was just overwhelmed. But the unease lingered. The more Evan tried to ignore it, the more it festered, turning every conversation, every interaction, into a puzzle he couldn't solve. His once loving fiancée now seemed like a stranger. Her eyes would flicker away when he spoke, her touch colder, and her words, though still sweet, rang with a tone that was both defensive and distant. One evening, as the wedding date drew nearer, Evan decided to take matters into his own hands. He wasn't going to let whatever was happening go unchecked. So, he decided to do something he would later regret. He went through her things, her phone, her emails, anything he could find that might explain the sudden shift. It didn't take long for him to find it. In the folder of saved text messages on her phone, there were dozens of exchanges between Charlotte and someone named D. The messages were flirtatious at first, and then, as the weeks went by, they became more intimate. The last message Evan saw made his blood run cold. "I can't marry him, D, I don't love him anymore. But I have to go through with it. I'll make sure everything goes as planned, then we'll be together. I can't wait any longer." Evan's hands shook as he dropped the phone onto the couch. It felt like the room was spinning, and his stomach twisted into painful knots. The words blurred before his eyes. She was cheating on him. She was planning to marry him, knowing she didn't love him anymore, knowing she was involved with someone else. The trust he had placed in her, the love he thought they shared, had all been a lie. He thought he might throw up, but instead, he found himself in a cold fury. How could she do this? How could she betray him in the most profound way possible, right before their wedding? But what hurt the most wasn't just the betrayal, it was the realization that she had been lying to his face, hiding everything behind the facade of the perfect couple. She had been pretending for months, and he had been too blind to see it. Evan sat frozen in the living room, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. Every part of him screamed to run, to leave before the inevitable confrontation, but he couldn't. He had to face her. He had to confront the woman who had once been his everything, the woman he was about to marry. The woman who had shattered his world in a way he hadn't even thought possible. The seconds dragged on like hours, and Evan's fingers curled into fists, his palms damp with sweat. The apartment, once a symbol of their future together, now felt like a prison. His mind replayed every moment of their relationship, the laughter, the late-night talks, the promises they had made. How could everything fall apart so quickly? When Charlotte walked in, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor, the weight of the moment hit him all at once. She was still beautiful, still poised. But it didn't matter anymore. She wasn't the person he thought she was. His heart ached at the realization, but the anger was rising fast, pushing the hurt aside. She paused when she saw him sitting there, and the flicker of guilt that crossed her face was the only sign that she knew what was coming. Her eyes shifted nervously, but she quickly masked it with a smile. "Evan, you're home early," she said, as though nothing had changed. "Don't," Evan's voice was low, but it held a quiet rage that she couldn't ignore. "Don't pretend like everything's fine. I heard what you said. I read your messages. I know." Charlotte's expression didn't falter immediately, but the tension in her posture was unmistakable. She took a slow breath, clearly gathering herself. Then, she shrugged, a strange calmness settling over her. "I knew this moment would come," she said softly, though her words lacked remorse. "You found out. I guess there's no point in pretending anymore." The words hit Evan like a slap to the face. His chest tightened as he fought to keep his composure. He wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, but instead, his voice was cold and controlled. "Who is he, Charlotte?" he asked. "The guy you've been texting? The one you said you can't wait to be with?" She hesitated, her lips pressing together in a thin line. For a brief moment, Evan saw a flicker of something in her eyes, fear, maybe. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "It doesn't matter," she said flatly. "It's over. It's been over for a long time." Evan felt his world crumble around him. Over? For how long? He couldn't even comprehend the depth of the lie. You've been planning this all along, haven't you? He asked, his voice hoarse. You've been pretending, smiling at me, making wedding plans, while you were already in love with someone else. All this time. Charlotte's face remained impassive. She seemed like a stranger to him now. The woman he thought he knew was gone, replaced by someone unrecognizable. I didn't want to hurt you, she said, her voice almost apologetic, but there was no warmth in her words. I thought maybe I could just go through with it, make everything look perfect, and then get out. Evan stood up, the shock and disbelief giving way to fury. How could you do this? His voice was trembling with rage. How could you play me like that? We were going to spend the rest of our lives together, and you've been lying to my face. Charlotte didn't flinch. She looked at him with an air of indifference, almost as if his pain didn't matter. I didn't want to hurt you, Evan. But you deserve someone who actually loves you. I didn't. I couldn't keep pretending. The words cut deep, deeper than anything he had imagined. She didn't love him. She had never loved him. The woman he had trusted, the woman who had promised to spend the rest of her life with him, had never once truly been his. She had played him, manipulated him, and he had been too blind to see it. He stepped back, shaking his head, his heart pounding in his chest. How long, Charlotte? How long has this been going on? When did you stop loving me? Her eyes flickered for a brief second, and then she answered, almost too casually, months. It started months ago. I didn't know how to tell you, so I just kept going. But I knew it wasn't right. And when I met Dee, I realized I couldn't keep living a lie anymore. The mention of Dee felt like a knife in his chest. Who was this person who had taken his place in Charlotte's heart? What had he done that Evan hadn't? The jealousy burned through him, but it was more than that. It was the sense of betrayal, that everything he thought he knew had been a lie. She had lied to him every day for months, and he had never seen it coming. Why didn't you just tell me? He whispered, his voice breaking as the weight of it all sank in. Why didn't you just walk away before all this, before the wedding, before the lies? Why wait until now? Charlotte's gaze softened for a brief moment, but then her walls came up again. I was scared, Evan. I didn't know how to let you go. I thought maybe I could fix it, but I couldn't. It wasn't fair to either of us. Her words were hollow. There was no real remorse, no true apology in them. It felt like she was justifying her actions, making excuses for the pain she had caused. And Evan, despite the deep ache in his chest, knew he couldn't let her do that. You don't get to hurt me like this and then make it sound like it's my fault, he said, his voice low but firm. You didn't want to let me go? You didn't want to hurt me? That's the worst part of all of this, you didn't care enough to be honest. You didn't care enough to give me the truth when I deserved it. Charlotte didn't answer. She just stood there, her arms crossed over her chest, her gaze drifting somewhere past him as if she couldn't even face the man she had betrayed. Evan's mind raced, but he knew one thing for certain now, he couldn't go through with the wedding. He couldn't stand next to this woman, who had just torn his heart out and stomped on it. There would be no wedding, no future together. He had to walk away, for his own sanity, for his own self-respect. You're right about one thing, he said, his voice steady as he took a deep breath. I do deserve someone who loves me. And you don't. The words felt like a weight being lifted off his chest. He had made his decision. There was no going back. He turned to walk out, not looking back, as the door slammed shut behind him. The days that followed were a blur. Evan had done the unthinkable. He had called off the wedding, cancelled all the arrangements, and sent out the word to friends and family that everything was off. The shock was evident in the faces of those closest to him, but none of them knew the truth behind his decision. To them, it seemed like a sudden change, like a man backing out of his commitment for reasons no one could understand. But Evan knew. And in his heart, he was certain he had done the right thing. The apartment, which had once been filled with plans for the future, now felt hollow and silent. The wedding dress Charlotte had been hiding in the closet, the cake-tasting notes, the plans for the honeymoon, all of it felt like a distant, painful dream. Evan couldn't stop replaying the conversation he'd had with Charlotte over and over in his mind. Every word she had said. Her indifference. The cold way she had shrugged off his pain. It all felt like a sick joke. And the worst part was that it wasn't a joke, it was real. He had been living in a lie. For the first time in years, Evan allowed himself to feel the full weight of the betrayal. The anger, the hurt, the disbelief. It consumed him, but he had to push it down. He couldn't let it define him. Not now. Not when he was facing the future alone. But there were moments, fleeting moments, when it all came crashing down. He would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, his heart racing. The image of Charlotte's face, calm and unrepentant, would flash before his eyes, and the anger would surge back, sharp and painful. Sometimes, he would walk down the street and see couples holding hands, laughing together, and he would feel a bitter pang in his chest. He was supposed to be walking down the aisle with someone. He was supposed to be building a life with her. Instead, he was here, alone, devastated, betrayed. Work was his only escape. It had always been his sanctuary. As the director of the marketing firm, he poured himself into his projects, staying late into the night, drowning out the noise in his mind with spreadsheets, meetings, and strategy sessions. The clients didn't care about his broken heart, and that was exactly what he needed. He didn't want to think about Charlotte or the life he had planned. The firm needed him to focus. And he would. He had to. But every so often, the thought of her would creep in, uninvited. It was like an itch he couldn't scratch, a question that lingered in the back of his mind: why? Why had she done it? It wasn't just the betrayal of her actions that hurt the most, it was the sense of being utterly deceived. She had never shown any signs of regret. She hadn't tried to explain herself. There was no apology, no explanation. It was as if she had no remorse for the hurt she caused. She had just moved on. But Evan couldn't. One evening, after yet another long day at work, Evan returned to the apartment, only to find that something was different. There were no traces of Charlotte's things anymore. No empty coffee cups, no discarded shoes by the door. It was all gone. She had taken everything. Even the photos of the two of them that once lined the walls were missing, replaced by an emptiness that mirrored the space inside of him. He stood there for a moment, staring at the bare walls. It hit him with an intensity he hadn't been prepared for. She was gone. Completely gone. The realization was a punch to the gut. For so long, he had clung to the hope that maybe they could find their way back to each other, maybe there was still something worth saving. But in the back of his mind, Evan knew the truth. She had already made her choice. And it wasn't him. Evan sank onto the couch, staring blankly ahead, his mind spinning. He should have been angry. He should have felt relief. But all he could feel was an overwhelming sense of loss. Loss of trust. Loss of a future. Loss of love. His phone buzzed on the coffee table. Evan picked it up, half expecting a message from Charlotte, maybe an apology, maybe an explanation. But it wasn't from her. It was from his best friend, Ryan. "Hey man, I know things are tough. We need to talk. Let's grab a drink tomorrow. You in?" Evan stared at the message, his finger hovering over the screen. He hadn't spoken to Ryan in days. Ryan had been there when he first met Charlotte, when they'd started dating, when the engagement had been announced. He had always been supportive, even when Evan was blinded by love. Now, though, he wasn't sure what to say to him. But as the seconds ticked by, Evan realized something: he needed to talk to someone. He needed to stop pretending like everything was fine, like he had it all together. He needed to get this weight off his chest. So, he typed a quick reply, "I'll be there." The next day, Evan met Ryan at a small bar on the corner of the street. It was quiet, intimate, the perfect setting to talk, to let out everything that had been building up inside him. Ryan was already there, sitting at a table by the window, a beer in front of him. He looked up when Evan walked in, giving him a tight, knowing smile. "How are you holding up, man?" Ryan asked, his voice soft, but with a hint of concern. Evan shrugged, sitting down across from him. "I don't know. It's all so messed up. I thought I had it all figured out. I thought she was the one, you know." Ryan nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "I know, man. But sometimes, the people we think are meant for us, they're just not. And that's hard to accept." Evan sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "I don't even know what happened. One day, everything felt perfect. We were planning the wedding, talking about our future. And the next day, she's telling me she doesn't love me anymore. She was already in love with someone else." Ryan's expression darkened. "I'm sorry, man. But you have to understand something, that wasn't your fault. She was the one who made those choices. She's the one who lied to you. I know. It just doesn't feel real." Evan's voice cracked, and for the first time since the confrontation with Charlotte, he let himself feel the weight of everything. "I gave her everything. My trust, my love, my future. And she just threw it all away. For him." Ryan put a hand on Evan's shoulder, offering a steady presence in the midst of the storm. "You'll get through this, man. You've always been stronger than you think. And maybe, just maybe, this is the universe's way of showing you that you deserve better. You deserve someone who will fight for you. Someone who won't leave you for someone else." Evan looked at Ryan, the words sinking in. For the first time in days, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe there was a future for him after all. Maybe the pain would ease, and the light would return. Maybe, just maybe, he could heal. "Thanks, man," Evan said quietly, feeling a weight lift off his chest. "I needed to hear that." As they talked late into the night, Evan realized something profound. It wasn't the end of his story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. Months passed. Evan threw himself into his work, trying to rebuild the pieces of his life. He spent time with friends and family, who helped him heal in ways he never thought possible. And slowly, the bitterness began to fade, replaced by a quiet strength. One evening, as he stood looking at the skyline from his office window, Evan realized something profound. The betrayal had been painful, but it had also given him clarity. He wasn't defined by his past. He wasn't defined by the woman who had broken him. He was defined by his own choices, by his ability to move forward, no matter how dark the road had seemed. He wasn't going to let Charlotte's lies destroy him. He was going to be the man he had always wanted to be, free, strong, and unapologetically himself. And that was the most important thing he had learned from the heartbreak. Sometimes, the greatest strength comes from the pain. Final thoughts. Evan's journey of pain, betrayal, and eventual growth is a reminder that while we can't control how others treat us, we do have control over how we react. It's painful to be betrayed, but the journey to healing comes from within. The story also raises the importance of honest communication in relationships and the idea that love cannot survive on lies.